Welcome back to the Adapt or Die podcast. I'm your host with the most, Armel Tala.
And I'm your host on the low, Ben Smith. This podcast is focused on one thing: finding practical ways to improve your health, wealth, and happiness.
As I like to say, you only peak once you stop trying. Thanks for joining us in our journey of lifelong learning.
And now it's time for the next episode of the Adapt or Die podcast.
Welcome back to another episode of the AOD podcast. You guys, before we even start, let me just get this out the way. If you're listening on audios, leave us a review, just do something to help out the podcast there. If you're listening on YouTube, subscribe, comment, and share this with a friend because this is gonna be another great episode. But we're back. If you're watching on YouTube, view setting. It's going to change again in a month, and then it'll stay, hopefully, for a while.
Hopefully, yeah. No, it should. I don't know why I wouldn't, but yeah, new setting again. Also, I was looking at the camera before we started, and I was like, wow, the bag's under my eyes. Like, I need more sleep. I was like, this is not good.
Yeah, and then speaking of sleep, now I sleep next to Ben, bruh, in a different next room. So we're moved in now a bit earlier than we expected, but everything worked out the way it should have worked out. But I don't know. Is there anything else you want to add? I'm gonna be on that Ben diet now.
It's a regular diet.
Ben also has a man bun.
Thanks for mentioning that, Mel.
It's a whole lot of things. The world seems different.
Many changes are happening right now. Yes.
Many changes, but a lot of cool things happened this summer. With all that being said, we took a fat break from this book, Grit.
Yes.
And now we're back talking about interest. What else?
Interest, purpose, and hope. It's all about, these are like kind of the three things to cultivate grit. Oh, wait, I missed one. Practice as well. My bad. You can see how long of a break we took from this book, but that's just because we both had a lot of classes. And how long has it been since we recorded? Like
maybe a month or even
maybe
more.
Longer, honestly.
Might be more.
I think it might have been.
Definitely been a while since I've posted a video.
Yeah, for sure.
So, but with all that being said, though, we're not talking about a game. We're talking about practice. But we playing the game now. To begin with, how do you follow your passion? Should I follow my passion, Ben?
Yeah, we hear this a lot, actually. This is like a really big commencement speech thing, like follow your passion, do what you love. You hear that too, especially with, I don't know, we listen to a lot of podcasts and I hear that a lot as well. But is this true? And Duckworth thinks that this is as true can be. There's a reason that follow your passion is a cliche. And there was a person named Hester Lacey who did more than 100 interviews on mega successful people, and here's what she had to say. One thing that comes up time and time again is, I love what I do. They say things like, I'm so lucky. I get up every morning looking forward to work. I can't wait to get into the studio. I can't wait to get on with the next project. These people are doing things not because they have to or because it's financially lucrative. And so she kind of identified that people who are mega successful do so because it's intrinsically pleasurable to them, right? And this is actually backed up by scientific studies in terms of you should be doing things that you love for two main reasons that Duckworth mentions. The first is that if you're doing something that interests you, if you're doing a job that interests you, you have enormously more job satisfaction. This was a meta-analysis of over 100 different studies, which basically just means that someone went over 100 different studies and did an analysis of all of them and came to the conclusion that you are much more satisfied with your job if you're interested in it. The second thing is that if you're interested in your job, you have much better performance. And this was a meta-analysis of around 60 studies over the past 60 years. So employees who are interested in their job, they are more helpful to their coworkers and stay at their jobs longer. Students, by the way, are more likely to get higher grades and much less likely to drop out. The point is that science and people, so mega successful people, are in agreement. Follow your passion.
Now you're gonna be told, okay, how do I find my passion? You might ask a question, said, okay, follow your passion. Well, how do I find this passion? I kind of don't like this idea of find. We're going to talk more about this on a different subject of purpose, but you should really foster your passion. I think that's the right term to use there. And then, like, big misconception is like, oh, people kind of view things like a movie. It's like, my passion is just going to fall into my lap. There's going to be this one moment where I'm just going to fall in love with something I'm doing. But it's the wrong way to look at it. It's not going to be a single moment. It's actually going to happen over a long period of time. You kind of really stumble into your passion, and you would have. And the thing is, you stumbled a long time ago, but it's not until you finally fall from that stumbling that you realize that it's your passion, right? And so an analogy here is like, think of it like a romantic partner. Um, and this is really good though. It's like, stop with the unrealistic expectations, and you could take this for both both domains here. You can't find the perfect partner, and you're not gonna find like the perfect career path or the perfect career for you to do. Perfect simply just doesn't exist. There's gonna be something that is close that fits all the right things that you want, but it's not gonna be it. So foster your passion. Don't follow it. I'm out here dying. But here's how, according to psychology. To begin with, you want discovery. So this is where your passion really starts. This is where the initial tripping happens. You won't find your passion through like introspection and deep thinking, as I like to believe. Uh, because as a child, when you're like trying to reflect back on your childhood, you really don't have any experience. Like, you could be like, oh well, I like these things, but it was like you didn't even do them that long. Especially as a child, because you're bouncing around a whole bunch of different things. So drawing on those memories isn't going to be like the best for you to rely on when it comes to picking a career, but it is a place to start. The most important thing is going out and experimenting and interacting with the world. Like, you have to, like, experience is the most important thing. Like, it's by far what you're actually going to be able to know. You can theorize and think, okay, maybe I'd like this, but you need skin in the game. And so initial discovery of passion usually goes unnoticed. And this is what I mean by, you're going to trip, but you don't realize that you tripped on your passion until you've fallen on your face. And so it takes a while, but once you're experiencing, like, experimenting all these different things, experiencing a lot of different careers, a lot of different hobbies, then you'll reflect on everything you've done, and then you'll say, whoa, wait, I actually really like that one thing out of everything else. Then the second is, once you've realized this, it's development. So this is repeated experience to a passion over a long time. So you've said, okay, this is the passion that I want. Now let me just keep doing it. Or this is the thing that interests me. Like, this is what is really interesting. In order to turn that interest into a passion, you have to do it over and over and over again. It's more about endurance and that spark. And then the last is deepening, right? So like, what's the point of like being passionate about something if you're only surface level? So, and you can do this by involving other people. And the reason why is because people not only can be like a support system, but they also can give you more advice, more, knowledge, more mentorship to how to get there. And that's what's really important, is like, you need sometimes some external factors to keep you motivated and also keep you on the right path. A great example here that Duckworth gives is Mark Vitry. Is that how you say it?
I hope so.
And none of us know how to say anything. But he's an award-winning chef. Look him up, because I didn't. Um, Mark was interested in music, so he moved to LA, like everybody always wants to move to LA, to go to music school. But he worked nights at restaurants. He didn't join a band at night. He joined a band. He would work in the restaurants in the morning and played music at night. And you're probably like, yeah, he definitely dropped the restaurant and went and played music, right? But one day, Mark was like, I'm actually making money from the restaurant, and I'm actually really starting to like it, right? And so then he had this opportunity to go to Italy, and the rest was history. Probably wondering, like, wait, so he liked the restaurant? Did he drop it? Yes, he dropped the music. He enjoyed. So he enjoyed cooking in high school. Like, that's the one part, reflecting on his memories. Worked in a local restaurant while he was in school, and while he was doing the band. He was also in the He was also still in the restaurant. Um, but he never thought of like the restaurant be his career, right? He probably was chasing music, went out to LA because he thought that's what it was, right? So he was experiencing these different things. But then it wasn't until he reflected that he said, you know what? Like being in this restaurant, making food is something that he actually enjoyed more than the music. So he finally discovered it and then went to Italy.
Now, a couple of things that are really overlooked when we talk about finding and developing your passion is time and space. And so let's first talk about play. Uh, Duckworth says that nobody works doggedly on something they don't find intrinsically interesting. And then she goes on to say, before hard work comes play. And so play is really important for kind of setting the stage for your passions, right? It's really difficult to develop an interest or a really deep interest or a passion for something if you take everything super seriously. How can you ever know if you really want to do something if you don't first play around with it? Just see if you like the field, see if you just enjoy doing random stuff for the sake of doing random stuff, right? And so, a guy named Benjamin Bloom, he interviewed 120 world class performers. And he found across all of them that as beginners, they began their journey playing, right? They weren't solely trying to get better. They truly enjoyed the field. And then later, they developed that interest, that passion. And then later, as we'll talk about, they aligned it with the purpose. But it all started with play. And although it does get more serious as you go on, we can't start out serious because you'll never know if you actually like something and you might just put yourself off to something instead of really enjoying whatever it is that you're doing in a certain field. Um, Another thing that people need is autonomy. This is something parents mess up a lot. Um, People, specifically kids, need to be able to choose what they want to do for them to think that it is an interest or a passion of theirs, right? So, parents that are super overbearing on their children, those children often go on to either not, let's say your dad is super overbearing, wants you to play basketball because he loved basketball or whatever. Later, even if you're really great at basketball, you're likely to stop playing it because it was never what you wanted to do. It was what your dad wanted for you. And even though you're really good at it, it wasn't your interest or your passion. So it's really important that whatever you do, it is your choice to do it. And we just call that autonomy.
Can I just say that's the dilemma my son will have to face.
Armel, that exact example might happen because Armel is a basketball head. But the ultimate point here is that you must play with different fields to develop a curious motivation, and this must be your choice. So don't shortcut exploration and play. It's absolutely vital to developing a passion. It's something that all world class performers have done at one point when they were a beginner. This requires a lot of time and a lot of space, right? I mentioned that at the beginning, but that's the point here is that it will require a lot of resources and energy that you might feel are a waste, but in the end are exactly what allows you to pinpoint what it is you're passionate and interested in.
And so we want to talk about my favorite thing, Kaizen. And
Oh wait, hold on. I forgot this is like I have a whole other 2 minutes to go on.
you just stopped talking. I was like, this is you kind of early. You just
Yeah,
kind
no,
of
no.
stopped the information.
I forgot this was my section too. So when we're talking about fostering a passion, where to start with all these things, there are a few questions that are really helpful. So I'm just going to read a few out. There's 5 of them. What do I like to think about? Where does my mind wander? What do I really care about? What matters most to me? How do I enjoy spending my time? And what do I find absolutely unbearable? So it turns out while using your childhood to, thinking back on your childhood cannot be won't be a great way to figure out what you're passionate about. Looking back on your teenage years can be much more helpful because in middle school or so is when you start developing real likes and interests and disinterests in things. And so looking specifically more at high school and college will give you a good idea, where do you spend a lot of your time? What were those things related to? Are there certain fields that you gravitated towards? Things like that. That'll be super helpful. Um, so for we kind of talked about Mel talked about 3 things: discovery, development, and deepening. And I'm going to go over those a little more in depth in terms of how to actually carry them out practically. So for discovery, just discovering your passion, begin with the answers you're surest of and build from there. So basically just start with what you like and what you know you hate, right? And think it's important to note that I didn't say start with what you love because you don't know what you love. If you knew you loved it, then it would be a passion, right? So just start with what you like, and eventually it'll become what you love. The second thing is don't be afraid to guess. Finding a passion is inherently a trial and error process. Um, and you're going to have to go out, interact, experience the world in that certain field or whatever, and figure out if you actually like doing that thing. There's no way you can intellectualize this or reflect on this unless you've already been doing that thing for a long period of time. You don't need to find the right or the best thing to do. It's kind of like, again, like finding a partner. There's no best partner, there's no perfect partner, there's no right partner. There's just people or things, in this case, for your passion that will fit you really well. So just move in a direction that feels good, and that'll be a great place. The last thing for discovery is don't be afraid to cut your losses and move on to something else. Until you're absolutely sure of your passion. Duckworth says you should work in pencil, and this is just because you're never really going to know, right? You need to be, how do I put this? You need to be quick to, not quick, but ready to pivot, right? Because odds are the first few times you choose something, it's not going to be right. And that's fine. But that's part of what I say when, it feels like you might waste time or resources trying to find your passion. And honestly, that's maybe true to some extent, but it's not a waste once you find it, right? So that whole process takes a while, but you need to go through that process. And then onto development. If you've already found an interest, just keep progressing it. So continually expose yourself to it, ask a lot of questions and keep digging, and find people who share your interest. Also find an encouraging mentor. That can be super helpful. And then if you've already found an interest and you've been deepening it for a while, the last thing is, developing it for a while, the last thing is to deepen it. And so for this, you just want to search for novelty in what you already know. This is really the only tip that Duckworth provided, because most of the time when people fall off the wagon, 4 or 5 years into a passion, it's because they're bored and they're looking for something new. But you need to find novelty in what you're already doing, because I guarantee you there's new things in there. You just haven't taken the time to really explore them or really figure out how they can pique your curiosity.
And now let's talk about Kaizen, improvement. The more time spent doing something equals the better you are going to be. The better you are doing that thing. Now the question becomes, is this actually true? Right? This is what we typically believe. It's like, practice makes perfect. But there's a specific type of practice that does make perfect. And Ben will elaborate more on this. But something that I like that Duckworth put in a great perspective was some people get 20 years of experience, while some people get 1 year of experience 20 times in a row. That's powerful because it's 20 years of experience, or you're doing the same thing every year 20 times. So, what does Kaizen mean? Kaizen means continuous improvement and resisting the plateau of arrested development. I'm gonna get that tattooed on me. But mega successful people are never satisfied. It's always, I want every book I do to be better than the last. And it's the opposite of complacent, but in a healthy way, right? And I like the way she put this. Don't look backward with dissatisfaction. Look forward wanting to grow. So in the past, like, you may not like where you're at or what you've done, but that's not something you should be dissatisfied. That's like a stepping stone for you to look forward to say, there's so much more room I have to grow. But this idea of Kaizen, this question of like, well, does spending more time on something actually result in me being better at that thing? Uh, that question can only be answered by understanding deliberate practice.
And so, yeah, so deliberate practice. This was an idea developed by a guy named Anders Ericsson, who is the world expert on world experts. He's the dude who, if you ever heard the 10,000 hour rule, that's where that comes from, Eric Anderson. And so he studied Olympic athletes, chess grandmasters, expert radiologists, etc., really in search of things that make them experts. And so the big idea here is that while quantity of time matters to become an expert, quality of time matters just as much. Okay. And so there are kind of three big things mentioned in the book that Duckworth goes over that Erickson learned in his analysis of, I don't even know how many world class performers. There's a lot, though, at least hundreds, if not maybe 1,000. I don't know. The first is that as you improve, your rate of growth decreases. However, world experts keep their rate of improvement high, or at least much higher than the average person. Most people just stop improving after a couple years, and that's where the idea, like where Mel said, of like 20 years of, or you get 1 year of experience 20 times. You're doing the exact same thing over and over, and that's most people after only a couple of years, if not even 6 months or a year. They've gotten complacent, and it's hard to improve, especially as you go deeper into something, and so that improvement just stops. The second thing is that it takes roughly 10 years or 10,000 hours to become an expert at something. This for this is definitely just an average. People kind of take this to the extreme and like, I'm gonna put 10,000 hours. It's like I wouldn't focus on the quantity of time that much. I think it might vary as much as 30%. I think there are people who spent 7,000, some people who spent 13,000 before they became an expert. So it's not the quantity per se. It's mostly just to give you a kind of a visceral scale of like how much time and effort you need to put in to actually become an expert. And if you do the math, after, and 10,000 hours doesn't sound like that much, but if you did 2 hours a day for every day of the year, you're still at like 700-ish hours, so you got a lot of long ways to go, put it that way. The third thing that Erickson discovered is that experts practice differently. And this is what Mel was saying. Experts use deliberate practice. So what is deliberate practice? So there are three things that make practice deliberate. And throughout this, I'm going to use the example of working out. The first thing that makes deliberate practice deliberate is a clearly defined stretch goal. Okay. Now, most of us think of goals as in like overarching goals, but this needs to be a clear target for, your day in, day out. And this will change, for each workout for our example. So being healthy is not a target goal. It's actually not even a good goal, but that's a different topic. Running a mile 5 seconds faster than last week, that is a clear target goal. Okay. That gives you an exact goal for your workout right now. Okay. And that's good because you need some type of motivation or some type of marker to push you forward, right? If you ever worked out with other people, I don't know if you noticed this, but at least I, like this happens to me, I'm much more motivated, at least to beat the person I'm working out with, right? But when you're working out by yourself, you don't have that motivation as much. And then by measuring and using your past um, achievements, I guess, you can kind of use yourself as the marker for improving, which is honestly a much better marker because if you're constantly improving yourself, that's like the best measurement, right? The second thing, or I guess going on clear defined stretch goals, you must measure your progress. So keep a diary, in this case, if you're working out, keep a diary of reps and sets or running times or whatever it is to keep measuring what it is you're working out towards. Now, the second thing for deliberate practice is you need immediate and informative feedback. So you need to be seeking out feedback as soon as possible. And honestly, this is going to hurt because most feedback is inherently negative, right? It's good to have positive feedback and that'll be helpful, but for the most part, you can't really improve on what you're already great at, or that's not true. You can't use positive feedback to improve nearly as well as you can use negative feedback to improve. I'll put it that way. Um, and this feedback needs to be very relevant, right? So you want feedback that is measuring what it is you want to improve at. So if you want to get stronger, then you don't want to measure, how fast you're running or something like that. You want to measure how much you can lift. Think, that's a very clear example, but it's actually really easy to mess up what you're measuring, and you will improve at what you measure at. So it's important to measure the things that you want to improve at. That's something people mess up a lot, including myself. You also want your feedback to be as clear and reliable as possible. So if your feedback is, how variable is the feedback that you're getting? How accurate is the feedback? Sometimes it can be really difficult to get clear, accurate, reliable feedback. And that's okay if that's the best you can do. But you want to be as clear as possible because it's really hard to improve consistently if your measurements are always off, right? Because then you don't know exactly where it is you are compared to where you were last week if every measurement is 10, 20, 50% off from where it could have been, right? That's such a large margin for error that your measurement might not even be useful. Um, So the third thing with deliberate practice is repeat with reflection and refinement. So once you achieve your stretch goal, then you're going to want to reflect on what you could have improved on, and then keep refining whatever it is you're doing. Right? If you're lifting, was your form perfect? Is your diet healthy? And then find practical ways to improve. Would you have a spotter help you out so you can feel safe in lifting more? Would a different exercise be much more appropriate in this case? And then once you've done your reflection and refinement, set a new stretch goal that will help you push beyond your current limit. I think from the art of impossible, a good stretch goal is roughly this is like a general like rule of thumb, but roughly 4% greater than what you can currently do. That's kind of a rule. It's definitely a rule of thumb, but it's actually has good scientific research behind it. It works really well for things like working out, and much more clear things. For other things, you know, I don't know how you measure like 4% better on the piano. I'm sure you can come up with something, but who knows?
I would prefer 5. I don't like that random 4 number.
Of
But
course you would.
the thing about deliberate practice is that, just from everything Ben said, right? It's very meticulous. It's extremely laborious. You need a lot of concentration. Like, not only are you just going in there to work out, but you're being mindful, right? And this is like what actually separates good practice from bad, from just a normal practice, is you're actually being mindful about what progress are you making. So this requires a lot of concentration, and it can be really frustrating. It truly can be. I was sitting here reflecting, thinking about, like, yeah, I definitely need to add some deliberate practice to my shooting workouts. And so this isn't something where you're going to always want to do, and it can be an unpleasant process. So a question is deliberate practice always the best to improve a certain skill? Well, we actually don't. I don't know if, do you think it is?
I think it's the best method that we know of as far as like the very best possible. Um, Not sure.
But with deliberate practice, if you do enough deliberate practice, you can reach this state. It's almost like nirvana. It's like the pinnacle of performance. Man, I already forgot his name. Mahi, is it?
I think it's Mihai
Mihai.
Csikszentmihalyi.
Mihai Csikszentmihalyi. We're gonna call it Mr. S, or Mr. S, Mr. C. Mr. C created and studied the idea of flow. Now that I said it, you guys can probably research who it is. But flow, you guys have probably heard this before, but flow is a state of complete concentration that feeling leads to a feeling of spontaneity.
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 It's a
Don't you just
strange.
love throwing in words that are just way too big for my
That's
vocabulary, man?
what you mean.
Is a state of complete concentration that leads to a feeling of spontaneity. Performing at a high, simply put, it's just performing at a high level for something that is challenging, and it feels effortless, right? When you're in flow, it's like everything is going, you are just crushing what you're doing, and you don't even feel like it's that difficult. But it feels like if you were outside of flow, it would be a struggle for you to just keep going through it. And this is much different than deliberate practice, because flow, even though they're both working on something that is difficult, something that you're trying to, like, it might be something that you're trying to work on that's, hard, right? But flow, when you're in that state of flow, everything feels effortless, while deliberate practice is really effortful. And time slows down, everything seems easy, and you're really performing at your absolute best without really even almost realizing it, right? And so Mr. C, the fact that I'm saying S and C, Mr. C argues that this is the hallmark of experts. Like, this is like if you can reach flow consistently and do this, like, you are an expert at what you're doing. Erickson actually argues that it's deliberate practice. Now, the author of the actual book, Duckworth, she goes, you know what? Both of you guys are correct. And the way to kind of think about it is, like, there's a clear relationship between deliberate practice and flow. And deliberate practice is preparation, right? When you're doing, like the name implies, practice. When you're doing this type of practice, you're improving a specific skill. Now, flow is performance. Usually, when you're in flow, it's like you're doing what you've been practicing, that difficult thing, but you're doing it in a state where now you need to get something done, or maybe it's like an actual game. We're not talking about practice, we're talking about a game now. So, and this is when you feel like you arise to what you've been put, like when you're in flow. I love it's like this saying of like you don't rise to the occasion, you fall to your level of preparation. And so like that's what it is in flow. Like if you've really been doing the right deliberate practice, then that flow state is you falling to that level of preparation, falling to those deliberate practice. And that is everything covering this section of interest. It's what it is
That was
interest,
actually just
passion,
interest. Yeah.
and
Ice practice.
practice.
Yeah.
There's a bit of passion in there. But now on to our favorite section, the debrief. You
And I'll start us off.
okay?
So it's kind of a long question, but bear with me for a second. So, deliberate practice, as we talked about, is very effortful, very intense. And my question is, should I deliberately practice as many things as possible in my life, or may it be beneficial to focus on a few things to practice deliberately at one time? So, should I deliberately practice all my workouts, all my schoolwork, podcast, etc., everything in my life at all times, or is that too much work to realistically endure sustainably?
Yeah, I feel like if just based on the definition, like without having to know more, or even having done it yourself, you can just think like this is probably an unsustainable thing, right? And it's like, does everything in your life need deliberate practice? And I would say like no. And it's like, and some things are really hard to measure. And it's also, I feel like it also goes with this idea of like you can really only have a few desires at a time, like something that you really want to get good at, right? And it's like if there's like that one thing, like you're like this is the thing that I really want to get good at, and if you keep adding more and more things that you want to get good at, like you there is trade-offs you have to make, right? And so it's like, okay, you could do deliberate practice, and like if you were like some insane person that was just able to like function fully at the top, like able to just take that much like energy consumption of like, okay, I need to make sure I'm keeping track of this, and you know, in that frustrating process of like, okay, this is what it is to deliberately practice. It's like you're gonna be upset because you're not always gonna see that growth, and you do that through every single thing in your life. Like that just seems like just draining.
Yeah. Well, I guess how many things is a good amount? Like how many things do you think is like a like is if I do three things deliberately practiced, is that too many? Is that right amount? Is five too many? What's
I almost want to say like it's it's really like I feel like in a day, like two is like the like two things that you want to do, but like within like a week or a time frame, it goes back to what I said is like how many things do you want to actually get good at, right? Because like you could theoretically say like you deliberate practice, like you are deliberately practicing two things every single day, two different things every single day, right? And so that's a total of like 10 different things you're trying to get better at, but you're doing those just once a week,
so you
right?
suck at it?
So yeah, so it's like, so you're just like stretching out how long it's gonna take you to get good, but really you're not gonna get good because there's just so much gap in between the time that you actually practice that I think like it's probably just two or three because I feel like it's better to just say, okay, I'm gonna crash course and like really hone in on this for like the next 3 months, and then move on to the next thing at a
I
time.
agree. I agree.
Yeah,
Do you think you should always be deliberately practicing your workouts? Like, should I always use deliberate practice for my workouts?
I think for working out like 100%.
Okay.
I think like by default it's just like
It actually is pretty like not easy, but it's pretty simple. It's like, okay, like what do I need to track for working out? It's like just track that.
yeah, I don't even consider like if you're like, okay, there's a whole bunch of things I want to deliberately practice, and it's like, and Armel said, you know, this is gonna be too energy consuming, so I need to pick them carefully. Like I wouldn't even count working out. It's just like you
That's
should
fair.
just do. I feel like you should just do that. Like in that
Yeah.
state of like working out, like, and that's something I'm also just like, yeah, I know I need to like do that right now. Like I need to definitely be keeping track of things and saying like, okay, this is what improvement actually looks like, and especially too because I know, like, what is it? How have you felt with the difference of like working out to work out and just like whenever you've worked out deliberately? What is like that difference?
When I don't like, if I'm not tracking my progress and I'm not like, oh, I need to hit the next rep from my previous workout. It's I just don't improve ever. Like I just stay same place like at all. So I think it just like kind of points to what Duck was saying, that like to improve, like to get rid of that flattening of improvement curve, that you get with any type of skill. You really need to be deliberately practicing it all the time if you're trying to improve, right? I think that's kind of the key point there, is like if you're trying to improve.
And so, is this deliberate practice tying it back to passion? Like, what is that relationship like? It's like if you're passionate about something, should you be deliberately practicing?
Yeah, I think this is kind of the practice part of your interest. Like you find an interest, but for you to be effective in the world at whatever you're interested in, you need to be really good at it, or else, I mean, I guess you could be really shitty at it, but I feel like that would suck. So don't do
And
that.
people usually like to do the things they don't suck at.
Yeah, and so she kind of went over all this to just go over like what you need to do. Like once you've kind of played around and found your interest, what you need to do to really be good at it and like develop it and really become an expert at that. And that, deliberate practice. And she goes into flow, but it wasn't as useful.
Does this deliberate practice does this deliberate practice, it's like, think of this think of this box, right? It's this box, you put in your interest, and up in this box is deliberate practice, and then it comes out a passion, or do you have to input passion to then for this box to work of deliberate practice? Like, because we say deliberate practice is hard, right? It's like this, it's like, this is just painful, gotta keep track of this. And I feel like one of the reasons why people don't keep track of the things they do is because they don't want to realize how much they suck at it.
That's true. That's 100% true.
Like, we were like, I suck at this thing. If I just keep doing it and don't realize how much I suck, I'm gonna get better, and then I can like then maybe keep track.
Yeah, no, that's definitely true.
So,
But
do I need to be passionate about this to do deliberate practice, or can I be just interested in it?
from I'm gonna answer what I think Duckworth would say, or from the book, really. What I would say is that you want to find something that you're really interested in and that you think could be your passion, right? Like this is like a really high probability that it's going to be your passion, but I don't think you're going to know that you're passionate about something unless you put in this type of work on it, right? Because it's really easy, not easy. It is much easier to think I like something or I'm interested in something if you're just playing around with it, but once it's time to really grind at the axe and you're really, you're starting to have to put in hours a day, that it's kind of monotonous. It's like, do you still enjoy it? Is it still something you're passionate about? So I would say like you're putting in an interest into this box of deliberate practice, and hopefully if you chose it right, it comes out the other end as a passion that you can, keep developing. But sometimes you're going to be like, I don't like this, and you'll have to start over again. So
And so that means this deliberate practice is like a filtering process for you to know if you actually are passionate about these things you're interested in. And now, when it comes to deliberate practice, you've done it. Let's say you're passionate about this, like, but for you specifically, have you ever gotten into flow?
I've definitely been in flow for sure.
And now my following question to that is, when does someone know they're in flow?
I think it has, for me, a big indicator is time. Time seems to just kind of like I don't think about time at all. Like I don't even notice it. It's not like I don't know what time it is. I don't know how long I've been doing something. Like roughly, but like I'd be pretty off, honestly. And time usually seems to go like slower. It's like I just feel like I'm doing something, and I just feel like I know like how to do it. I like but it's like just the right amount of challenge, but it's like pleasurably challenging. It's like, oh, like how do I do this? And then I figure it out almost immediately. Or depending on what you do, like if you're playing a sport or something, it's like you're you're playing, the game or whatever, and everything just comes to you so naturally. Like time's pretty slow though, and like I don't know, all those types of things. It just feels natural. It feels not necessarily easy, but it does feel effortless in a lot of ways.
So when you say time slows, like, as if Like, do you look down, you're like, "Man, I got a lot done, and I thought it would take a lot longer," or does it just feel slow?
I think the second one, it's more of like compared to how I usually feel, it feels like maybe I could say like I'm moving quicker, but it just feels like whatever the obstacle is coming, like it feels like it's like easy for me to like figure out like what to do. Like it's almost like something's like as far as figuring out the problem, it's like it feels like it's in slow motion, and like all I'm doing is like just kind of mechanically using what I've already like prepared for to like just blaze through it, if that makes sense.
I don't know if I've been in flow yet, but when I do, I'll get back to
I
y'all.
think you've done. I feel like we've all been in flow. I just don't know if we've like recognized it afterwards. You know.
Yeah, definitely wasn't in flow Saturday morning. Just how difficult is it to get into flow?
I think that's going to vary on a person to person basis, right? Like, I think depending on who you are, what it is you're doing, um, and how, there's a lot of things that can put you into flow. That's going to depend on what it is you're doing and what kind of cues and other things that allow you to get into flow. So I think it's going to vary like a lot. I know, like, I think if someone was like a world expert in something and then they went off and tried something else, I think if that thing was totally different, their ability to get into flow would be completely different for that thing just because they don't have any experience with it. So it's going to be much different getting into flow for those things because they don't have as much of a knowledge. Like, what are they going to flow with? Like, they have no preparation for those types of things, right?
Yeah, we're gonna have to read a book on flow.
Definitely.
Yeah, but that's because that's a whole nother episode. Um,
Yes.
so now we want to talk about turning this interest, this passion. You've been deliberately practicing. It's been painful, but you come out and you're shooting as good as Steph Curry.
For Mel, that is a pipe dream. I'm just kidding.
Now,
That's for all of us.
purpose. Now, how do you take this Steph Curry like shooting and anything you do? This is an analogy, guys. Turn this into purpose. And then what is hope in all of this? But let's start off with purpose, Ben.
Yes. Purpose. So, like I mentioned earlier, a guy named Benjamin Bloom who studied world class performers. Um, And from his interviews and his studies of over, I think it was like 120 world class performers, he found that there's generally three stages. So you've probably picked up on these already, but I just want to go over them very clearly so you know what we're talking about. The first is the early years. That's what he calls it. And this is it's the same thing as finding an interest. The second stage is the middle years. This is practicing that interest. So that'd be a lot of deliberate practice, I would think. And in the later years is developing the larger purpose in the meaning of that interest. And so, just quickly, purpose, as we define it, is the intention to contribute to the well being of others. Now, normally you add a purpose onto an interest. So, as Bloom put it, you start with the early years, find that interest, middle years, practice that interest, and then finally you add the purpose to your blooming interest to make a passion. However, you can actually start with an interest. You can actually start with a purpose, sorry, and the interest comes after. So, interest and purpose are separate but equally important sources of passion. It is the combination of two that gives you passion. It is not just interest or purpose that gives you passion. They are inherently like mixed together. And a good example of starting out with purpose is a young girl named Alex Scott. She had neuroblastoma and began a lemonade stand to raise money for people like her who also had neuroblastoma. But she passed away at the age of 8, and she did end up. So she started a lemonade stand, and her lemonade stand raised $2,000 for people like her, and that inspired others to also start lemonade stands as well. And then Alex's family created what's called Alex's Lemonade Stand Foundation, which now has raised over $100 million for cancer. So Alex was not old enough to really get an interest going, but she did have a purpose, and that purpose has made a huge impact on the lives of others, particularly for cancer research. So that's just a practical example of how some people do often start. They can start with purpose, but it's just more common to start with interest because that's what comes natural to people. A lot of times, it's difficult to pinpoint a certain purpose that you're truly passionate about, unless you've experienced something or someone close to you has experienced something similar to Alex's case. Um, but how important is purpose? Duckworth tries to answer this question by recruiting 16,000 Americans to complete her grit scale, which, if you remember from last episode, is just a short questionnaire trying to figure out how gritty someone is. And actually, it was pretty accurate in determining the success of cadets at West Point, making it through the first 3 months or so of their training, which is usually when most of the cadets drop out. So they answered her grit scale and then also a questionnaire about purpose. So an example from the purpose questionnaire would be like, for me, the good life is the pleasurable life. And she'd have them rate how closely they related to that statement on a scale of 1 to 5. And so after this survey of 16,000 adults, this was the conclusion. The first was that grit scores held almost no correlation to pleasure seeking, meaning that people who are more gritty, and as Duckworth would, as she's kind of shown throughout the book, if you're gritty, the more successful you are. People who are more gritty have no correlation to pleasure seeking. So people all across the grit scale have roughly the same amount of pleasure seeking, meaning, we all like to go to Whataburger sometime. I'm not sure if you live in Texas, but you should go to Whataburger sometime. So higher grit scores didn't mean less pleasure, and lower grit scores didn't mean more pleasure. The second thing that was interesting was that grit scores were very correlated to purpose. So grittier people, again, generally more successful people, are far more other centered. They desire to help people. They want to contribute back to society. And this is because we think that people who have a higher purpose, who want to give back to others, they are the ones that end up contributing or being the most successful, because not only did they find an interest, they found a purpose, and their passion is much stronger because of it. So a purpose can be extremely important. Don't just focus on your interest or your purpose for that matter, but try to find both. But just start with one, probably your interest.
So this is why we only talked about interest in the first half, because you need purpose. That's interesting. I didn't think about it that way. That like you're passionate about something because it's interesting to you and you has a purpose. That makes 100% sense. Very interesting. But passion, purpose, calling, whatever you want to, put a title on it. I like this example of bricklayers, and not the El Chapo bricks, guys. So
You have to explain that to me later.
you don't get the El Chapo bricks,
Uh-uh.
Ben.
I could just live in a hole. I'm sorry.
No, it's just cocaine.
Oh, I see. I understand now.
But
I am slow.
So there's like three bricklayers. Three bricklayers are asked, "What are you doing?" The first says, "I am laying bricks." The second says, "I am building a church." And then the third says, "I am building the house of God." Now, the first person, they're just looking at it as like, this is just my job, my boy. Like, my job is necessary. I'm laying down these bricks. But in translation to most people, it's my job is necessary. It's a part of life, like eating and sleeping. Now, the second, they're looking at it as a bigger thing, a stepping stone, right? The second person says, I'm building a church. In translation, this means my job is a stepping stone to other jobs. He's like, I'm building the church now, but I might be a pastor in it later. Now, the third, this is calling right here. The third is saying, I'm building the house of God. In translation, my work is one of the most important things in my life. This is already the pastor. He's helping out laying the bricks. And the goal here, you want to be the pastor. You want to be the third. You want to be the third bricklayer. You want this job to feel like it's a calling. There's something about it that's calling you to a higher purpose. And whether a person has a calling or a job depends on the person, not the job. Let me repeat this. Whether a person has a calling or a job depends on the person, not the job.
Preach.
So you don't magically find your calling. You're not going to get into some whatever job you think is your dream and you'll develop and like you'll deepen that calling. It's kind of all based on your perspective, on your perception. Your job becomes your calling when your perception of your job changes to allow you to see it as a calling, right? And you can always tie things into this. Like, this is kind of like the beauty of life is like there is no real like it's in like life nothing is actually defined. Like I want to say nothing matters, so therefore you can make anything you want matter, right? And an example here is our boy Joe Leader. You just knew he was gonna be a leader. Um, Joe was looking for a job out of college, and he was hired to work on trains by chance. Like when I read that, I was like, dude, that sucks. Damn, you working on trains. He ended up actually being pretty interested in the work, and then he enjoyed creating designs and drawing like the layout of the trains and stuff. I think he was an engineer. Joe's view changed. He was like, yo, wait, when I put down this bolt and I screw this thing in, it's gonna last for decades. Like people are gonna be using this. And so he felt like he was contributing to society. Building these trains would last for 30 years, helping people get to where they need to be. And eventually, because he was interested in it, because he saw this purpose, he got promoted and now he's a senior vice president of the NYC Transit. He found his calling. Now, when finding your calling, you may be conflicted like, do I have to be so selfless? Right? Yes, be selfless. But at the same time, you can also be selfish. It's this like mix of both because if you want to really make a difference in the world, you want to be the best that you can be while wanting to help others, right? And so you chase your interests. That's you being selfish. But you also chase your purpose. That's you being selfless. And that's what it is. That's what passion is. It's this combination of you being selfish to want to do this thing, but you being selfless and remembering that this thing you're doing is for a greater good, right? And so, in order to actually cultivate this purpose, you can reflect. You could do three different things. I'll list them out. I'll list them out for you.
Please do.
They're like, I would hope you would do that. Number one is you can reflect on how the work you're doing. You can reflect on how the work you're already doing can make a positive contribution to society. So you can ask yourself these questions: How does the work? How does my work impact others? How willing? How will learning about X help me contribute to others in the future? Right. So this is forcing you to try to take what you have and find the positive, find the calling in it. Second is you can ask how can you alter your current work to enhance its connection to your core values, right? So sometimes you're doing something but you don't think about like, okay, well, how does this connect to the core value, right? It's like what can you do to make your job more meaningful, right? Maybe there isn't something directly, but it might just be because you're not doing enough. You're just like doing the bare minimum because you just don't think you like the job, right? Or you can ask yourself, how can you help others at work even more than you already are? Because as simple as helping someone else is a beautiful calling. It's something where you can automatically feel like you're adding to society because you are. And last one is like find an inspiration in a purposeful role model, right? So like look at someone else and say, "Wow, they're doing something that's amazing." Maybe they're doing it in the same position as you. Maybe they're doing it somewhere else. At the same time, like you can still pull from that, right? It's like who led you to want to help others and who do you admire that gives back to society? So those are things that you can keep in consideration when you're trying to cultivate this purpose. But with purpose, it can lead to hope.
Hope, the last part of grit. So we've gone over interest, practice, and purpose. The last thing is hope, which is the resolve to make tomorrow better than today. I like that definition a lot, actually, because I don't know. I never really thought about what hope meant besides, like, it seems kind of like a wish. It's like, I hope, I wish something will be better.
Mm.
But I like the way she put it, resolve to make tomorrow better than today.
That's
And
well, I do want to say like that's true hope. Like a lot of the hope that people have, like they're in a situation where there is no need for them to try to make tomorrow better. So they just when they think of hope, they're just like, I hope this happens, right? But like when we're talking about hope, like hope in like we read A Man's Search for Meaning. Like hope in a situation when you're in like a concentration camp, like that is having real resolve to be like, well, I need to find a way to make tomorrow better than today. Like that is real hope. But go on.
Yeah, I like good expansion on that. I like that. And so there's a good saying that Duckworth included. It's a Japanese saying, but it says fall 7, rise 8. And I like that just because, when I first heard it, I was like, fall 7, rise 8. Like, why 7 and 8? And I think just because, like, 7, like, if you fell 7 times, like, that's a good number of times, right? And I guess you could say, like, fall 55, rise 56, and you get the point. But I think 7 and 8 is, like, enough. You know what I mean? So, like, I think that's why I chose 7 and 8. Sorry, that was a weird tangent, but I
I,
thought
f-
I'd
I,
mention it.
I feel like there's also some other meaning with 7 and 8, but I don't know.
There probably
There
is.
probably
Who
is. We're
knows?
not
Who
deep.
knows? Um, But let's begin by talking about hope, by talking about hopelessness. And we'll talk about hopelessness by starting off with an experiment with dogs. Although, if you like dogs, you're not going to like this experiment. So let's give it a go. Um, in this experiment, dogs are given random electric shocks without warning for 5 seconds. We are very sorry. Dogs did get hurt in this experiment, so I don't know what to tell you. Um, but there was a difference. Group 1, the dogs could push on a panel to stop the shock early, so less hurting of dogs. It's good. Group 2, though, dogs could do nothing about the shock. And so they did this experiment on the dogs. They did this. This is the first part, and then the next day, the dogs were placed in a different cage with a low wall that was just high enough for the dogs to leap over. And then once that was done, once they're in the cage, high-pitched tones were played that would signal that a shock, around the collar or whatever, was coming soon. Now, if the dogs jumped over the wall, no shock was felt or given, I guess. And so the dogs in group 1, which were the ones that were able to push on a panel to stop the shock early, nearly all of them jumped the wall and saved themselves from being shocked. Group 2, though, which were the dogs that could do nothing about their shock the previous day, 2/3 of these dogs just lied down and whimpered. They just gave up. And so the interesting part about this experiment was that hopelessness can be learned. And real quick, just to define hopelessness is suffering you think you can't control. I also really like that. I like the definition as well, but that's all I'm going to say about that. Um, but you can learn hopelessness, right? These dogs, if they didn't have the chance to stop their shock the day before, the next day they were, based on this experiment, they had a roughly a 66% chance of not even trying to stop the shock the next day. And so, just this are some interesting details associated with hopelessness for humans is depression, sleep problems, changes in appetite and physical activity, as well as poor concentration. So it's actually a pretty important study, and it's important to realize that we as humans can learn to be hopeless or hopeful. Um, and the fact that we can learn to be hopeless does mean, in my opinion, as well as others, that you can learn to be hopeful as well, which is a good thing. But what makes someone hopeful or hopeless? Well, hopeless people attribute their failure to permanent causes, right? So if they fail at something, they say, I'm a loser. I screw up everything. And it is what it is. I was born this way and there's nothing I can do to change it. On the other hand, hopeful people attribute their failure to specific temporary causes. Okay, so maybe they say, I mismanaged my time, or I worked inefficiently because of distractions. But because they attribute these to very specific causes, these hopeful people go out and they fix these causes and they come back, grow. They're much better off than they were before. And so uh, these people go on to fix those causes, right? And they become better. And so another name for people who are hopeful is optimists. And Duckworth points out a few things about optimists that are pretty interesting. I feel like we've heard this like multiple times. I think we talked about this in Thinking Fast and Slow.
Hmm.
But optimists, this is mostly just like a random fact, or random facts about optimists. They earn higher grades, are less likely to drop out of high school, they stay healthier, and they live longer. There's a whole bunch of other things, I'm sure, but those were just the ones that Duckworth mentioned. But the point there was that you can learn hopelessness and you can learn to be hopeful or be an optimist, and that will be very helpful for you, not just in the short term, but in the long term, and for everyone around you, and your health, and your grades. Just be hopeful.
Be hopeful. Be an optimist. Yeah, also 0 to 1 covered on it too. But in order to learn to do anything, to be an optimist, to be hopeful, you need to have the right type of mindset, right? Sounds like I'm about to be selling you something. No, I'm not. Just listen to me. Growth mindset. Carl Dweck. Those words were.
Carol.
God damn it. Carol. Carol Dweck. See, that's the thing. Like, why is there like the same name spelled like? Is it spelled the same? Or is that me?
I think you just read it wrong.
Carol. So Carol Dweck created and researched growth mindset. Very popular, right? And I love this quote. This is I want this to be ingrained on my tombstone. Whether you think you can or you think you can't, you're right. Henry Ford. And so a growth mindset test, I'm gonna say 4 statements, and you guys just which one resonates with you the most? One, your intelligence is something very basic about you that you can't change very much. Two, you can learn new things, but you can't really change how intelligent you are. Three, no matter how much intelligence you have, you can always change it quite a bit. Four, you can always substantially change how intelligent you are. Now, anyone could assume the first 2 statements that is a fixed mindset. You think that your intelligence is fixed. You can't add more to like you think this intelligence is this fixed thing. The second ones are a growth mindset. You believe you can grow. Name straightforward. But what does it really mean when we're looking at it from a point of view of failing and learning? Well, when you have a fixed mindset, failure is evidence of your I can't say that inadequacy. um, you get this idea when you have a fixed mindset that when you fail, it means you aren't good enough. But with a growth mindset, you view failure as lessons to learn from. And this is evidence that you just need to try a bit harder. Now, there's some type of people that you'll meet in life, kind of like they're the fragile perfect, someone who knows how to succeed, but not how to fail. And so they've always succeeded and they've attributed this to their talent. When failure arrives, they're like, oh my God, our talent ran out. And these type of people, it's impossible to tell someone they might have believed they had a growth mindset, but you don't know you have a growth mindset until you've actually hit adversity. And then it makes you understand where your mindset actually is. But to cultivate a growth mindset, update your beliefs. And so, what does that mean? It means you must believe intelligence and talent can be improved upon. If you don't believe that, you can't go anywhere. Like that's just like the simple truth. Um, Practice optimistic self-talk. Remind yourself that failure isn't permanent. You can always learn from it. You can always grow. Always got to find the positive. Be an optimist, and then ask for help. When facing adversity, it's okay to ask for help. It doesn't mean you're dumb. It means you're actually smart. Because why waste all that time being stuck on something when someone could help you out? And that's everything.
Yeah, the second section was much shorter. There was a lot on interest and practice, but not
Hey,
as much for purpose and hope. Although equally important, I would say.
you get to the point. But now, let me start off here in the debrief. What's the what's the difference between finding your purpose and developing your purpose?
It is, it's the difference between saying like you're not going to go out into the world and simply run across something that is just absolutely perfect for you, right? Because that just doesn't exist. But you can start with something and keep improving that thing or keep changing it or modifying it and until you find that purpose that is exactly what you want to do, or at least really, really close to it. And that's the difference between finding and developing. I think finding kind of implies that there's no work involved, whereas developing kind of shows you that there is a process, there's effort, a lot of work involved, which is important because if you kind of go along thinking I just need to like go around and search for my purpose and it'll just fall on my lap and then boom, uh, that kind of excuses you from a lot of work. that you should be doing, which will hinder you in the long run.
It's so interesting how like that word, you change from finding to developing. That does change it. Like, but how does this one? You touched upon it a bit, but if you could elaborate, like, how does this one word change the way people understand like this pursuit of purpose?
Yeah, I mean, I think it really is just as simple as it I think it just excuses people from like on their mind, like their head, from a lot of the work that really should be done. I think it's one of those things where um maybe excuse isn't the right word, because if I guess if you have a bunch of people telling you to go find your purpose, it's easy to misinterpret that. And so maybe like you really do think that you should go find your purpose, but finding and developing, when people say find your purpose, a lot of that finding is actually like creating or furthering or developing whatever it is that you're starting from, right? Because you, like we said, there's just nothing just falls in your lap. That's just life. So, yeah, that's all I have to say about that pretty much.
It's like that binding is like you going around and experiencing things, but like we mentioned, you have to finally take one of those things, once you kind of maybe have an idea of what it could be and put in the deliberate practice to actually develop it. It's so important. Maybe these commencement speeches need to change the way they phrase things,
I think
right?
so, for
Or
sure.
be more clear. Or maybe people just aren't even listening to the speech because they hear find your purpose. Like, how many times has someone said this already? And they don't
Facts.
listen to the rest. Or maybe they just aren't telling it. But that's all I have. Yours?
My question for you: what percentage of people do you think have a calling?
My first thought was to say 1% because it's like, ooh, who are the one? It's like 1% of people are like the successful people in life, right? But I don't think that is an indicator. But and it's not just financial success. I'm referring to when I say 1%, but it's just like they feel like they feel successful, right? But I actually think it probably ranges more in like 10 to 20, maybe probably in closer to 10.
I would say closer to 10, but I would even say maybe even a little lower. But yeah, I agree with you.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I don't think it's one, but like
How many have like a job and a career, do you think? So let's say if let's just go with 10 for a calling. Like, what about the other split for like who has a career, and then how many people have just like a job?
like 30% of people, you say 10% of people have a calling, 30% of people have a career, and that's 60%. The rest, they have a job.
It's, it's kind of sad, honestly, because the thing is like that sounds about right in my head, and I think I've yeah, that just sounds right. But why do you think that is? Like, why do you think so many people just have an occupation?
It's like my question, it's they think they have to find it. They think they have to like jump around to a bunch of different jobs until like they damn, I just came across it. This is my calling. Like, but when it's you could look at the job you have, like maybe the thing is like the job you have could just not be it, and you got to go find that other job. But it's like some people just keep either trying to find it over and over, bouncing from job to job to job to job, never liking anything because they just are already just never gonna like it. But some people are like at a job that's like good, and they're just like they just can't extract any value from that job because they just look at it so negatively. So it's due to perception. Like everything in life is just perception, in my opinion. Like once you realize that, you're like everything is fake. Like yeah, I think Steve Jobs put it perfect. He was like people that made like that decided how the world is today are really no smarter than you. They just decided and we
It's
accepted.
true.
And it's like, why do you have to, right? And so I think that's really what it is. What about you?
No, I definitely that quote you said is I'm still thinking about that because I've heard him say it before. I've read about it before, but it's just like that's like so profound as well. It's like the people who created. I mean, there's definitely some people, who are smarter than us, than the majority population. But for the most part, especially like not that long, like unless you're like an astrophysicist or like you like went to the moon or something. Like other than that, like everything you see around you is made by someone who's basically the same as you.
Yeah, like any businesses, any like I don't know, laws and stuff like that. Like these people aren't like smarter than you. They just like either like worked a lot harder, had that growth mindset, and so they got to that point. But it's like anyone could have been in that, in that same position, right? But there is only exceptions of like if you make like semiconductor, if you come out with E equals MC squared, like that's different.
Little bit smarter.
A little bit smarter. But with that being said, that is the end of Grit. You can conclude this book. It was a good book.
What's your rating?
That's a great question. Probably a 7.5 out of 10. Yeah. I think that's where it falls. You?
I was thinking like 7, maybe 6.5.
6.5. I expect you
probably 7. Maybe yeah.
I expected you to be lower. But it's been a while. Maybe we're being a little mean. Or maybe we're being too nice.
I don't know.
With that being
oh, go ahead.
I was gonna say recap.
Oh. Yeah, okay, I'll recap. This might take, hopefully it doesn't take too long. Let me begin at the beginning. Yes, so we started off with follow your passion, and we backed that up with, the fact that pretty much every successful person ever says do what you love, follow your passion. And we also mentioned that science says that you'll do your job better and, you'll be more satisfied with it. We went on to talk about how you don't find your passion, you foster your passion. So life isn't a movie. Passion's just not going to drop in your lap. You actually have to go out in the world and foster that passion, and that process looks like discovery, so finding your passion, development, practicing that passion, and then deepening, pretty much just adding purpose and deepening it and practicing it more. You're going to need to play when you are exploring your passion. So don't forget the fact, like, it shouldn't all be work when you're trying to find your passion in the beginning, or your interest, really, I should say. You need to play and give yourself time and space to do so. And you need to make sure it's your choice. So you have autonomy. That shouldn't be a huge problem for most people. But if you're a parent, make sure you give your kids autonomy with what they do. And we talked about some practical ways to do these things. You can go back and listen to them because we really don't have time to go over them in depth like that. Armel talked about Kaizen, so continuous improvement, right? We always want to be improving, but the best way to do that for most skills is deliberate practice. And actually, a good indicator in my head of whether you're doing deliberate practice properly is, well, I guess there's two things I would think about is like, if you're in deliberate practice, is it frustrating? Honestly, it's usually a good indicator in my head. But B, if you're performing and you're in flow, that's a great thing as well. And then yes, so we finished. That was the first half talking about interest and practice, and the second half adding purpose and hope. So purpose is the intention to contribute to the well-being of others. This is really important, and I would say is the about half of your passion. So you need to use purpose and interest to create a passion, not just one or the other. If you're missing either one, you will be lacking behind people who have both, especially if they're in your domain. You are in trouble. And you want to find a calling. So you don't want to find a job or a career. We're searching for something that is really meaningful and powerful to us, and we do that for a living. So we're not just building, we're not just laying bricks. We are building the house of God, as the parable put it. And then hopelessness and hope. We can learn hopelessness and hopefulness. And so it's important to realize that you can grow and improve. As Armel put it, if you have a growth mindset, then you will. It's impossible to improve if you have a fixed mindset. So a growth mindset will be instrumental in pushing you beyond your boundaries or whatever thought was possible. That was a long recap because our episodes are getting much longer, but I hope I did a good job. If not, though, you can just go back and rewatch the entire episode again because that's a great thing, right?
Okay. Maybe do it later on. But now
it's time for my favorite part of the episode. Quotes from Armelicus Milius.
Enthusiasm is common. Endurance is rare. Let that sink in. And the second one, this is a two-part special.
No.
Our potential is one thing. What we do with it is quite another. Angela Duckworth on both of those. Thank you guys so much for listening. It's been an amazing episode. Thank you, Angela. Grit was, even though we rated in the 7s, it was a great book. I think if we would have read it a lot earlier in our book reading journey, we probably would have rated higher. And make sure you guys, check out all the stuff we have in the links below. Till next time, peace.